Hello, everyone. My name is Simon Stump, and I am excited to welcome you to Welcome Change. This is Ashoka's weekly series where we hear from social entrepreneurs around the world on timely topics and solutions. Today, we are going to be hearing from Gita Syahrani. I'm so excited for you to meet this social entrepreneur from Indonesia and learn about blueprints for sustainability. But before we get to that, I just want to say a couple things about how we're going to spend our time together. We'll be chatting, Gita and I, for about 20 minutes. And if we can keep it to 20 minutes, we want to hear from you. So use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to bring your own questions into this conversation. I actually think that's it. We are ready to meet our guests. So Gita, first of all, just hi, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Hi, how are you, Simon?
I'm great. It's great to see you. We're gonna learn about you and your work, but this corn in the background, like, what, what
What's
are we
up with the
looking at?
corn?
Yeah.
The corn is actually, so this is a background screen that I've been using for I think a couple of years now. So it's a local corn crops from Gorontalo, one of our
Hmm.
district members in LTKL, and it's actually an indigenous crop that is disappearing right now
Hmm.
because they were so good and very resilient, so that the district were famous for their corn.
Hmm.
The national government decided, okay, this is going to be the national corn center, and then they start actually pumping hybrid seeds,
Ah.
which are maybe less resilient but um, more productive at that time, but it's not an indigenous crop. So by 2021, when we were starting to explore the local cuisine, we found out that this corn is almost gone.
Mm.
And it's a reminder for us all, I think, not to take things for granted and look
Mhm.
at things that are local in our surrounding as something that we need to nurture and appreciate,
Mm.
and not rely too much on things that are foreign,
Mhm.
sort of different species.
Sure,
Or
sure,
even if
sure.
you give room for new species, do not let it kind of erase what you already have.
Beautiful. We're jumping right in. We said this conversation around timely topics and solutions. This topic or this set of challenges. I mean, I know your work gets to the solutions here, and we'll get to that. I just want to also mark this moment in time. We're connecting with you as a brand new Ashoka Fellow, one of the newest to this global community, at a moment in time which will be important in Indonesia's history, we believe. 2024, 2025, for reasons you'll describe later, are potentially pivotal years. And Gita, you also just won this Climate Breakthrough Prize and 3 million in grants that come with it. So from my perspective, I would say, wow, this is like anything's possible. And so I would actually love to start with this question, which is, what is the biggest possible dream that you're dreaming right now, given all this momentum and
Yeah.
potential?
I think it's almost like the reason why I think it's like living in paradox right now. It's like very excited, but also super nervous that
Mm.
I want to do it everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the broader imagination right now is actually to trigger imagination of Indonesian, to try to envision what our life would look like the next 20 years, and hopefully not only as a nation that are there for the next 20 years, but maybe the next 200 years. And one of the core thing that I really want to help people with is to remember how connected we are with nature, just like the corn story.
Mm.
Sometimes we don't remember that nature is actually part of us in our daily life, the way that we eat, the way that we travel, the way that we choose our clothing.
Mm.
So everything is actually very connected. And once you remember that you are that connected, then you'll start appreciating it more. And hopefully, once you start appreciating more, you look for ways, your own way, your own unique way to try to be part of this movement of trying to protect and restore all things related to nature. And essentially, it's all things related to you as a human being and as a human race. So it's a very broad picture, but I think the core of it is unlocking our core memories so that at the end of the day, we become the nurturer, the guardian of
Mm.
nature.
Gita, can I ask, maybe it lands as a personal question, but how deep in your own
Mm,
history or experience do you have to go to unlock core memories of being part of nature? Is it very accessible to you? Did you have a very nature-filled life, or did you do some of
mm.
that discovery work yourself?
I think I got very lucky. And then it's also a testament to my family. Yeah. So I was brought up in a household where with my mom and dad and also my grandma, and in particular my grandma was like an avid botanist,
Hmm.
and she would give me chores since I was a little kid, to try to talk to the plants and water the plants at the same time, and asking them how they feel, and thanking them, because what she said was they are the reason why we are still here. And we have to thank them every day, because once they don't think that we should exist in this earth, then they can unlock their superpower and actually kick us out. So that was like something that's ingrained in my memory. And I thought everybody was living like that, until I discover at one point in my life, it was like 5 years old, I think. And we have a rickshaw driver that gets me to school every day. So I
Hmm.
have like a personal bond with this guy as well. So I thought he has the same mindset. And then suddenly one morning, we were just driving with a rickshaw, and there's a dog that's lying on the street. And
Hmm.
then he, like, without hesitation, kicked the dog so that the dog doesn't block our way. And at that time, I remember I was like hyperventilating. I was so surprised, and I was like, "Why are you doing this?"
Hmm.
Apparently, it's different with other people, and he simply didn't think that, um, animals or plants are part of like a core being as essential as human. And
Hmm.
at that time, I remember I was asking my mom, but I don't particularly remember how she answered the question, but I was asking like, why are they like this? And then she said it's something about mindset and perspective. So from that point in time, I kind of wanted to try to help as many people as possible to try to remember that if we are not kind with nature, there's a risk that they might kick us out. So remembering that point, is a kind of a core memory that stayed with me. Of course, we evolve as a human being. I evolve as a person, and it's also like self-discovery in every stage of life. So it looks different, like how I help people to try to remember looks different
Hmm.
in different stages of life, but that particular core memory stayed with me. And that's why for me it's very important to find these trigger moments
Hmm.
in your daily surrounding, in your family, in your household, in your school. It's majority of the time it's not big things. It's these soft moments that stayed with you and kind of changed the way that you live.
It's beautiful. I'm feeling in this conversation, we're talking biggest dreams, these core moments, but then you also use this phrase, as many people as possible. And one thing I so appreciate about you and your work, as we would say, a social entrepreneur, is that you do design for and work, with solutions that can reach as many people as possible. So, and here's how I understand your work. I mean, I see you, we were talking about blue corn, you're wearing, beautiful, I'm sure it's local and sustainably, grown and locally, designed and manufactured, or, made clothing. And yet you don't stay there. You think about what are the systems and what are the structures, including the political systems and structures and incentives and funds, as part of, long-term development plans and policies that can allow for this sort of living, this sort of, these livelihoods. Did I get that correct in terms of, like, one, like, you would love to just be in this garden
Yeah.
with, or in the yard with grandma, but two, we're going upstream into these systems, because I'm going to ask you about these systems. So is that
Mm,
okay to kind of jump from you, this person,
yeah.
in touch with? Okay, yeah.
Yes. Because I think everybody has that grandma moment, right?
Mhm.
Even if it's our president or our parliament member, or our teacher and the CEO of like an extractive company, they all have their grandma moment, I believe. And it's how do we discover a systemic way to try to unlock that core memory so that people can actually act in their own way, in their own, like, to the best of their power, in the best of their capacity to kind of suck up to earth.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's create this vocabulary as we go. The unlocking the grandma moment is absolutely
Yes.
what you're doing, but with, as I'm understanding, it's like sort of like district level administrators and planners, right? Like these are
Yeah.
bureaucrats. Is that an accurate way to say, like, public employees or elected
So,
officials? But yeah, a little bit of
yeah,
just
go ahead.
landing. This is a core constituency of yours, and it's one that, like,
Mm.
I usually fall asleep talking about people, like, and with no offense to people in these, I just am like, Gita, with all of her creativity and energy, is working with who? So tell us who you're working with.
So, I am part of the creation of an association for district government. So just as context, because I saw the attendance list, and it's from all over, not only Indonesia. So just as context, in Indonesia, you have national government, and then provincial government, and then district government. So in terms of authority, it's maybe similar to a state in the US, where a lot of the land use planning and land use licensing and also enforcement comes to play. So I was very privileged back in 2016 when several districts actually wanting to collaborate within themselves, but also with as many partners as possible to try to answer one very specific question, which is, how can we design a development pathway that allow us to balance between ecosystem, protecting important environmental ecosystem like forest, like peat, like your riverbanks, and at the same time also uplift welfare of farmers like corn farmers, palm oil farmers, the fishermen, and also families living within and surrounding the important ecosystem area. And it started from a very concrete needs, because 2015 was one of our biggest fire season at that time. I think the total emission of Indonesia from the fire alone that year equal to the total emission that the US actually emit that year. So it was really big, and it was really painful for multiple generation. Yeah, you lost people from health reason, from actual disasters reasonings as well. So these leaders actually wanting to answer that question because they want to prevent something like that from happening. And I was privileged enough to be offered the opportunity to help facilitate them and actually build this into an association that can work with as many third-party partners as possible that can help them answer that question. And our work at the Secretariat is a backbone team that try to strategize with them, try to make sure that they're connected with the right partners to implement the strategy, and most importantly, also trying to incentivize good behaviors along the way. So kind of incentivizing progress so they keep they're motivated. And these are not only, so we look at districts as a holistic ecosystem, not only the government officials like what you said, but also leaders of the community, leaders of the civil society, the young professionals, the academics, the private sectors, the small medium scale enterprises. They all are elements within a jurisdictions that is a district, and the membership in our association is actually extended to the district itself. So it's not a leaders association. It's not a government necessarily only be involved in the day-to-day activity. So it's, for me, it's very interesting to see the dynamic, and going back to the point that trying to make sure that people understand that they are more than their title. They are human being and they are person. And when they connect as a person, then they can unlock a lot more answers to the questions that they want to answer, which is, again, development pathway that is not destructive, but regenerative.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So that makes me, so much of what you just said makes me want to reframe that original question. I want to see people as full people. I don't want to disparage or say that this thing isn't exciting. You make it, I mean, it's so critically important and exciting. There's also this other layer that I've understood, which is, I think there's something 400 districts in Indonesia, and there are 80 that have a certain significance. Could you
Yeah.
describe the sort of, I mean, you'll work with anybody, as you just
Yeah.
said, but there's a particular focus on a particular set of districts with a
Yeah.
certain profile. Who's your target audience?
So right now, the membership in our association is actually limited to 10, and people ask us every time, why is it so small? But
Yeah.
it's because we are connected to the National Association of District Government that houses more than 400 districts. Like, all districts are a member to that national association, and we are treated as, so our organization's name is LTKL. So LTKL is treated as a caucus and also as an accelerator. So we have an expiration date, which is 2030. So by 2030, it is expected that this sort of small group are able to produce proof of concept that can then be replicated by all of the district. And by 2030, supposedly we're, sunsetting and be fully integrated into the National Association, because we do have the proof of concept, we have the success story, we have the failure story, we have the blueprint, and also we have the partners. But then we were thinking, okay, if it's all 400 and the essence of it is trying to find this balance between ecosystem protection and welfare, why don't we also look at it more strategically for Indonesia? And around 80 districts in total have the highest number of forest and peat coverage. And if we were to extend the network into focusing on that 80, of course, if more are joining, that's also great. But at least looking at it as the core targets, then we will be able to actually help Indonesia build a development pathway that is much more balanced. The good news is that right now I'm transitioning into a new coalition that LTKL also helped as a founding member, which is called the Earth-Centered Economy Coalition. And in that coalition, we work with more districts to try to expand what we learned from LTKL as well. So currently, actually, it's already happening. We are working with 59 districts that have declared their commitment for integration of sustainable pathway on land use in particular into their long-term development document. And that declaration was done last month. So this month it's drafting. The drafting season has started because we do have this momentum that in 2025, our long-term development plan, which is our scenario for the next 20 years, both at the national level and at the local level, are expiring. So we work with these districts to try to also help them integrate what it looks like in their development pathway. So LTKL members, almost like as a front runner, is also imparting some of their learnings, but they are on a peer-to-peer learning experience for the next year. Hopefully, by next year, if we speak again, then I'll be able to tell you how many out of those numbers are actually having integrated that element into the actual document.
It's beautiful. Yeah, this is the number. This is the thing I teased up at the opening, this 2025 number of locking in these 20 plans. There's also some changes to electoral politics next year. Well, you'll have a big election, a big national election in 2024. So yeah, this is this moment that you helped me see, and that I think you're so brilliantly organizing around. Could we, so we talked about the 80 districts that hold this particular potential globally because of the presence of rainforest and peat coverage, is how you said it. I find this so fascinating, and I, as I said, I've learned from you about Indonesian, governance and politics, but I also learned about peatlands from you. Could you well, thank you. So, and could you perhaps share for the global audience tuning in the particular prominence and importance of this particular feature?
Yeah, I mean, peatland can be considered as part of forest ecosystem as well. But what's special about peatland is that it has, so it's a specific type of ecosystem that is, I think, the highest carbon storage, with the highest carbon storage potential. I think it's 13 times more prominent than a tropical forest, for example, on mineral soil. And it's actually, it's young coal, actually. So if you it's 100 years worth of soil and a lot of natural elements being put together. And if you keep it there, it's one of the world's biggest weapon against climate crisis because it has, a lot of carbon storage potential. But so you have to keep it moist and wet. And if it's dry, then it's very flammable. And once it gets on fire, the fire is actually smoldering. So the fire is inside, and you cannot see it. So you can just see the smoke without being able to detect where the fire is, let alone trying to put out the fire. So it's very difficult. And when it's on fire, then it emits a more potent carbon emission compared to any other type of soil. So it's very specific. It's very delicate as well. And this is why Indonesia is one of the one of the country with the largest number of peatland ecosystem, and several of our district members in LTKL are districts with peat area. For example, the district of Siak in Riau, they're living with 57% of peatland area in their territory. So the only way for us to try to guard the peatland is trying to find ways to live with it and trying to keep it wet, essentially, and not to let it burn.
And so as I understand, if you wanted to farm in an area like this, you would dry out the peatland, or you could harvest the peat, and these would be the ways in which we might head towards this climate catastrophe you just described. Help us understand in your process, what sorts of conditions or situations would you envision so that we can keep those peatlands moist, so that we can what does a solution look like in a particular case?
So as you mentioned, right, usually peatland are drained for economic purposes, to do a plantation, for example, to make the land much more productive. Although there are multiple research that shows even if you drain the peat and then you make it into a plantation, you will actually be operating at loss because it's very expensive to actually maintain the water table so that it becomes a viable plantation. So number one is that. So might as well not do it. But then sometimes it's not only like if it's industrial scale, the government have issued regulation to prevent that. We have a moratorium in place and it's not allowed to plant on peatland anymore. But we do have community that are also relying on peatland because it is their only plot of land. This is just to give context. We haven't discovered how precious peatland is, maybe until a decade ago. So before, smallholders would be just making their livelihood on peatland. So now the question is, then how do we address this? How do we address people still having livelihood on the ground? So what we do as an association, of course, this is bear in mind anything that I said in terms of things on the ground. Those are things that we help facilitate, but then the district and the partners are the one that is implementing. So specifically for the Siak area, as one example, at that time, the young professionals in Siak were actually the one that are most restless about, okay, then how do we make sure that the farmers can still make livelihood? And one of the solution that we found when we help facilitate a trip together with several technical partners are an indigenous tradition, a local tradition, where they usually consume a specific type of fish. It's cork fish, and they consume cork fish from peatland area in order to recover faster from surgery. When you just give birth, for example, they would consume that as a soup, steamed soup, for a month.
Huh.
And then we thought maybe there's something here, because if it's fish, then there's a reason why you need to keep the peatland wet because then fish can live there. And if you can find added value from that fish, then it's a viable economic opportunity. So working with partners, we try to look at that particular fish and try to find out what are the benefits that makes everybody starts eating it for faster recovery. And apparently there's a substance called albumin that can be extracted from the fish, and the fish that are living in a healthy peat condition have a more potent albumin content as well. And albumin can actually be a significant health substance for multiple medicinal purposes in modern medicine. So then we thought, okay, how do we link up this discovery with a viable business plan? And it is there now. In 2020, the group formed the first community-based enterprise, looking at this particular innovation as their business model. And in 2 years, they've got an investment to do their own production facility, get their license for nationwide distribution. They won an international award from MIT. They won the National SDGs Award. They got a long-term buyer for the next 2 years. So it's working as a business. And because it's working as a business, then we can start spreading real news that if you keep the peat wet and there's fish there, then you can actually make the fish a viable business opportunity. Then there's a flip side to that, right? Because it's a community-based enterprise, some of the shareholding are owned by the community themselves at the village level. And we also don't want to overpromise so that they start overfishing, because in peat, you cannot monitor the number of the fish that's there. So it's also about finding the right balance of production capacity so that you can keep the ecosystem intact while at the same time keeping the business model also alive. So this is the type of things that we do in the Secretariat, trying to match make ideas and innovation from the ground to do value added products and services that is along the same line as innovating for nature. So looking at nature protection as an opportunity, not as a burden, but connecting them with the right partner so it becomes a real thing. And they can actually find careers through this opportunity. They can find lifelong choices through these opportunities. That's one example of many that we are working with right now. We're very lucky to actually found a lot of very talented, very promising young professional, civil society, private sectors that are also supportive on this idea and on this journey and our role in the Secretariat. And I'm kind of playing the same role for the new coalition, for the Earth-Centered Economy Coalition. It's kind of also expanding on that. So instead of working with, LTKL has 27 partners at the national level and around 70 at the local level. And now we're adding that list with like another 35 members of the new coalition. So hopefully the movement gets bigger and bigger and we can unlock a lot more discovery on the ground.
Oh, Gita, it will. It certainly will. I mean, this thing is so beautiful. The example was so helpful for me. It's specific, it's clear. Your language is also beautiful. Life-aligned choices is just, it's stunning, and I love it. I have to admit, I offered the frame Blueprints for Sustainability. I do think in what you just described, because of time, just quickly, so we can close that loop. What you just described with the albumin, the fish, the peatlands, essentially it is a blueprint, right? Because the other districts that see the viability of that will have some easy access to that playbook, if you will, that blueprint. So that's how the association's benefits by being in community. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the blueprint is also about the dynamic and the interaction. Yeah. So in total, I mean, we've defined transformation pillars to transform a district into a more sustainable district on land use in particular, having 5 main pillars, which is the planning, policy and regulatory framework, and then we have multi-stakeholders governance. we have the innovation on the ground, and then we also have the fifth pillar, which is monitoring, reporting, and communication. And the blueprints that was suggested, it covers these five pillars. So kind
Okay.
of, if we are successful to build these blueprints, you'll know how to do each pillar and what to prep in order for you to successfully conduct all of the blueprints. And then hopefully also the cost calculation. So the government and the rest of the stakeholders also knows what type of investment does it take and who are the payer for those investment. How do you divide and conquer kind of the division of roles? And that's the dynamic part between multi-stakeholders, and try to make sure that everybody's interest is also being served, while at the same time staying true to the end goal, which is executing this blueprint in order to find the suitable development pathway that maintains balance between protection and also uplifting welfare.
Beautiful. Gita, we're at time, but we did promise folks we would take some questions. If you have a few more minutes, I would love just to bring in a couple questions from the participants.
Yeah.
And even maybe that gives folks a minute to add their final questions. I mentioned this to my kids that we were going to be speaking today and asked what I should ask. And I just, my 11-year-old had two questions for you. The first was, how do you work with lumber companies? And I was like, oh, okay. And the second was, if you had a superpower, what would it, if you could have any superpower in the world, what would it be? So I'm going to start with his questions and then we'll get to the audience ones. Lumber companies and superpowers.
So the lumber company kind of resonate with one of the questions from the audience, which is private sector.
Yes.
So we do work with larger scale company like pulp and paper companies, which is kind of lumber, kind of logging also. So we see existing large scale companies as companies that have been there for a long time, that have bring in a lot of economic opportunity for this district. And right now it's about working with this company so that they can be on their own sustainability journey, trying to make sure that their impact from their business is consistent with no deforestation, no peat exploitation, and no human exploitation. A majority of the companies have this NDPE commitment, and working with them to try to make sure that the NDPE commitment is implemented well, but also implemented in a way that is consistent to how the jurisdictions looks at development pathway. So it's not as if company is doing one thing and then the government is planning something that's completely different. It's about bringing all those interests together. So at the same time, you can try to find entry point so that you can divide and conquer. If you have the same goal, it's easier. And those conversations, apparently rarely happen. So if we can create processes, facilitate processes where these type of conversation normally happens, and it becomes a norm, then it's easier to share resources even. Just one specific thing with it's not a lumber company, but it is a company that was working with the fish, the albumin company. So right now the company has their own village that they are supporting in near their concession. And part of the partnership is that these villages would be selling fish that comes from their territory to the company, to the albumin company. So at the same time, you can look at this opportunity to do like even more grassroots partnership, not between the company themselves, and sorry, not between the company and the government, but between the company with each other.
Beautiful. I'll relay all of that to him. I think he wanted to hear something about chainsaws and like hiding out and stuff. But that's great. Superpower. What's your superpower that you wish you could have?
I think superpower, if I can, if I have a superpower to help people unlock their core memories automatically, then that will be wonderful. Because I think people have their own superpower within them. So if my superpower is unlocking everybody's superpower to try to help nature better, I think it's a cheating answer, but That's my answer.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You can see the questions in the chat as well. Is there anyone that you're particularly excited to jump into? There are a few. We talked about private sector, about government, about faith communities, and then a couple about sustainability more broadly. Maybe we'll take
I think
two and then we'll wrap.
Okay. Whoa. Okay.
Whoa. Good questions, guys.
Great question, guys. I think the question from Claire is about the failure story, and that's the fun one because success can be boring. Success stories can be boring. So maybe talk about some failures.
Let's do it.
So maybe we can do that.
Yeah.
And so the failure one, I think there's many failures in the journey towards matchmaking interest between multi-stakeholders. There are, for example, at times we actually try to convene multi-stakeholders to try to dive in their development document right away. But at that time, we forgot that normally the stakeholders that's in the room are not used to be in the same room and speak openly and freely. So rather than having a constructive conversation, what we have during that particular meeting is people start distrusting each other even more. And we saw that trend of, finger pointing and things gets tense. And then we kind of pause a bit and say that, okay, this is definitely not working. The way that we're structuring the meeting is a failure. It was like a whole day meeting, and after lunchtime, everybody started walking away, and we had like 3 participants left. So we kind of like, okay, let's just wrap it up for the day. And then we try to salvage that experience by going almost like door to door again, trying to listen what happened, what made you uncomfortable, and then what would make you more comfortable to actually speak with each other in an open manner. And one of the things that they suggested was actually everything feels better with coffee, and doing it in a coffee shop and in a casual setting rather than in a meeting room. So the week after, we decided we'll follow their cue and actually host the meetings in a coffee shop while drinking coffee, and it made it better. So sometimes we come in from like the bigger city, thinking that we know facilitation technique, and we try to structure a meeting a certain way, but if we forgot the listening part, then it's kind of pointless. So always start from listening, I think, is the lessons learned from that failure.
Gita, that's beautiful. And it's so beautiful. Thank you for the 40 minutes of telling the full story, because we can see how this convening in a coffee shop, with all of the ways in which it's situated in Indonesia and in the district level decision making, it arrives at the abundance of blue indigenous corn behind you, and the futures ahead of us. The life aligned choices and life aligned futures that are abundantly available. So it has been so beautiful speaking with you. We have to wrap here. And I just have to close by saying, for folks who've been with us, you'll also have a recording that will arrive by email as soon as we wrap. And we will be here again next week. Again, this Welcome Change is a weekly series from Ashoka, where we bring solutions and inspirations and ideas and learnings from our global community. Gita, it's been such a privilege to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening there. I'm excited to start my day here.
Yay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Simon.
Hey, thanks, Gita. See you later.